small group with us. Love that. We have a small group in progress, and so we can afford to be quite informal about this and really actually have a good, intimate, shared experience. I mean, that's a weird word to use for an academic talk, isn't it? But I'm going to do, my name is Anne-Marie Creamer. For those of you, some of you have got initials or such like, so I'm not necessarily familiar with you, but I will, this is going to be, I'm the person who runs the DPS course, and so you would have been getting emails inviting you to this talk from me. And so I'm going to do a very brief introduction just to the basis of this event in a very broad way, and introduce you to actually the host for this event, which is Owen Parry, who has invited in turn someone else, and we're going to set this thing up. So the DPS course, some of you who are here or who are not, the Diploma in Professional Studies, it's a course set up really for students to begin to experience and think about the worlds of work beyond the university. But often when people think about professional practice, they think of it as being quite dry and technical, or a series of kind of professional skills which are somehow other than everything else that you do and who you are. But you know, many of us know that in fact that's not true. That's not the way things are. And so all of the different DPS talks you would have been invited to are really differing ways to begin to help students, help everyone think about and understand that this notion of the forms, the approaches, the tools that you use to manage your career and professional experience are completely tied up with your research, your innovation, who you are, your values, your principles, everything else. We've got 3 strands this year, and this strand is one that I've called DPS Tutors Platform Talks, which really it's a way to offer some of the DPS tutors, in this case Owen Parry, to give them a platform to really, within the broad scope of DPS, to invite anyone they want to come along and to stage an event. And this is the second one that Owen Parry has done. Owen Parry, for those of you who've not met Owen, is he's a tutor on the BA Fine Art course, maybe other courses too, but that's the one I know about, in the area of critical studies, and he's also an artist and a researcher. We actually should be calling him Dr. Owen Parry, because Owen's got a PhD from Goldsmiths on a title that I would love another time to talk to him about, which is called Trashy Tendencies in Contemporary Art and Performance. And you should take from that Owen has a real ongoing interest in lots of ways around performance art and live events. And I'm noticing this event and last year's event, Owen always takes a really interesting approach, which actually often works with the whole form of the event as a live event and live talk. So last year, Owen invited somebody where we did a live life drawing, a queer life drawing session together with an artist who was really good at experimenting with the whole form of online remote events and drawing. And today is going to be another experiment with Alisa Oleva. And this is going to be an interesting one. Now, I'm sitting at a table inside, but once I do this introduction, I'm going to actually shift to going outside to walk with the rest of you, because this event will be where we're all together across different locations, but we're going to be walking together with Alisa as she shares her talk with us. So we will be able to, you know, hear her breathe as she walks. I don't know if you want mics on or off, Alisa, you can tell us. But it's going to be quite an experiment to see how the shape of this talk works. Now, you should know that the shape of this talk is also part of Alisa's practice. You're seeing her work is in motion and happening right here in this talk. So she's managed to kind of work up and develop this form, and this introduces you to a much wider variety of forms and approaches that artists take to the work they do, and how they share their practice and so on as well. So I'm now going to turn over to Owen, and I will mute myself and my camera, and I will meet you again outside in a few minutes.
Great, thanks, Anne-Marie. Hello, everyone. As you can see, I'm already out on the street, so I'm already ready to begin walking. I won't say too much more. I'm going to just briefly introduce Alisa Oleva. It's a huge pleasure to be able to invite Alisa to take us on a bit of a journey, I guess, through her work and her practice. And when I was asked to invite someone, Alisa came to my mind because just out of coincidence, we have kept bumping into each other in different ways. We have friends in common. And I guess the London live art, performance art scene and community is quite small in some ways. So we overlap a lot of the time. And I've always been so, I guess, energized by Alisa's work and just about by Alisa's attitude. And she just feels so up for it. And she's involved in so many great things going on in London that I thought it would be great to bring her along. I'm also excited because Alisa has found some very interesting ways to both engage her practice with her kind of paid work beyond her kind of work as an artist as well, in other ways, as a kind of programmer and slash curator, but also as a tour guide in the past. And I think it's just, yeah, really interesting as a way of kind of thinking about how to sustain practices and how to kind of feed practices with maybe our day jobs in different ways. So I'm not going to say too much more. I'm going to I'm turning my camera off just to save my battery, and I'm just going to give a brief bio for Alisa. So Alisa Oleva is an artist working in the spaces of the city, exploring urban choreography and urban archaeology, traces and surfaces, borders and inventories, intervals and silences, passages and cracks. Alisa holds a BA and MA from the Courtauld Institute of Art and an MA in performance from Goldsmiths. Her projects have manifested as a series of interactive situations, performances, movements, scores, personal and intimate encounters and situations, parkour, workshops, and audio walks. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Alisa, and yeah, enjoy. We'll come back at the end for a discussion, by the way.
Cool. Well, thank you both for introduction, and Owen once again for inviting and trusting my work. I'm not going to say much before I head out and invite you to head out. I'll just give a short guidance or like invitation that I'm sharing with you. So I do invite you to go out together with me wherever you are, and just keep walking. You can either have your camera on or off. It's totally up to you. I will have my own, sharing just my footsteps, so you can see where I'm walking. I would ask you to keep your mics off if it's okay, because I think there will be quite a lot of sound coming in from my side, so you can still hear me talking. So think of it almost like as an audio walk or a podcast or whatever you're more used to. It's obvious, but I still want to mention that please be aware of traffic and yourself walking as you're listening. It might change how you navigate the city. But also I don't want to put entire pressure and say like that if you are today deciding not to go outside and not to walk, that's also an option. As we've learned in the lockdown, also sometimes there are ways to walk in your mind, and probably like watching just the video of the footsteps or just listening to me talking about walking might also be your way of walking somewhere. And I really like this book that talks about the journey in one's own room, which was written in the 19th century, and the idea of like also walking in your mind or imagining the walk. So yeah, just not to put any pressure, but I do encourage you to go out on a walk. And just so you have an idea of the pace of it, I will be just talking. We're not going to have any visuals, but to have moments of some sort of rhythm or moments of silence, which I really value. And actually I do a lot of walking together in silence. I've prepared for each of the my pieces of work that I'm going to mention or talk. I've prepared a score, because the score is something I work, like walking scores is something I work a lot. So from time to time, before starting like a new chapter of our walk, I will read out the score that invites for the next section, and just have like a minute or so of silence so you can dream about the score or imagine it. And I'm just gonna get dressed and take out the first score. For those who are inside, you can also take this this moment to go out. Score number 1. Go out. Walk aimlessly without any destination. So yes, when I say go aimlessly, I really encourage you today to walk somewhere. Don't think about too much, but really try and not use this walk to get somewhere, like to go to a shop or get closer to who you are meeting or something. Or you can have a sort of direction, probably, like going north or south, but I would really invite you to drift, because for me, that's a really important part of the practice. The idea of stepping out and not knowing where the streets will take you. And this will come up quite a lot today in my work. And also just to give an idea, like I only recently started thinking about why do I walk, or why it became, because by now I can say it became my main practice and the main technique I use in live art and performance. And I must say that as a kid of suburbs in Moscow, we had this even expression to go to the city. So we would go in the morning towards central Moscow and just hang out there all day, and know all the places where you can go in, find free toilets or get a bit warmer and so on and so on. So the city became really inhabited by us and really used as a place where you can be, where you can hide. And also it carried on with my displacement when my parents moved out from Soviet Union, when it fell apart in the 90s, and I was brought up by my grandparents in Russia and never really met my parents till much later. But also when I finally decided to move to UK when I was 16, I never really had a home. And I must say today, when I was thinking where to start, I realized that I'm again in this moment where like I'm moving homes, and there has never been a sense of finding that place in London which could be home. And I think that's why walking became so crucial, because for me walking in a way became home. The way or the route, or just being on a go, just wandering through the streets of London, actually became a way to be here and to connect and to feel the space. And I think that's why all these like reasons to walk, which are quite old and have always been there, later allowed me during my studying years to become what I do, to really allow the main thing that defined my way to relate to the world through walking, allowed it to become my main practice. And I'll take out the second score. Score 2. Is there a place in the city which you would like to get rid of, demolish, cut out of the map? So it's interesting that today started talking about my work. I'm actually going to start about a piece which doesn't involve walking per se, but it's really important and crucial for the way I think and experience the city. This piece is made together with my collaborator, Debbie Kent, and we are together called the Demolition Project. And it started actually during our studying together at Goldsmiths. And so the Demolition Project is just a big map of London, and it started in London, but then moved to many different cities in different countries. So it's a big map of London, and it's just there on the table. So it's like a durational installation. And whoever is coming by are invited to think of a place in London that they really want to get rid of. They just don't want it to be on the map. They want to demolish it, tear it off the map. And we do indeed give our participants a paper knife, and they can literally cross it out, take it out, rip it off with a paper knife carefully. And in exchange, we ask people to write what they demolished and why. And so in the end, you get this map full of holes and this map full of reasons on the sticky notes. And it became a really important framework and tool for people to share their opinions, to share their emotions. And what was really important for us to feel a bit empowered and in control, because so much of what is happening in the city, especially in London, things being demolished or things being built, is out of our control or is not, we are not asked. And this feeling of giving the agency and empowering and this feeling that you can really rip it off from the actual map. And it was always important it's an actual map because people felt very precious about it, that as if it was actually demolishing something. And it became extremely, extremely popular and important. People were so into it. And we always allow people to do whatever they want with the small demolitions they did. So someone demolished the city of London and they added, someone demolished like their ex-boyfriend's flat. Two people, for example, one wanted to demolish Victoria Park, but someone else convinced them not to. So you also get sometimes people actually discussing something and persuading not to do something. And sometimes we had someone who demolished and took out all the water from the Thames, but left all the bridges and asked that she wanted the Mediterranean water instead. And sometimes we also get people who demolish something, but next day they would bring it back and say, oh, they've changed their mind or something. Someone demolished their school and used the lighter to actually light it on fire, this small piece, and said that it was super cathartic for them and really thanked us for this experience. So, and of course, at some point, someone wanted to demolish all of London, and we don't really give any restrictions. So we allow people to demolish as much as they want. And so this person said, okay, I'll think of a better solution. I'm not going to demolish all the map. And then they went away. And when they came back, they demolished the Thames barrier and wrote that they would like to see the water entirely flood all of London. And that was their creative solution for how to demolish all of London. So in a way, this map became really important, and we've done it in many different cities, and it would always be different responses depending on the city, of course. And and so after that, we've also led people on different walks where we would talk about the we would walk in London and bring them to certain buildings, but talk about those buildings as if they don't exist anymore, saying, you know, for example, in 2019, this one was demolished by someone and someone because of that. So it was almost like this reverse map of when you talk about something that used to be here. And I think this piece is really crucial in terms of how I feel about the city and walking in it, and that I feel really important to offer the audiences a way to feel different about the city, or to reflect or feel a bit more empowered about how we can experience and navigate it. And score 3. Go outside. Follow someone until you can no longer follow them. In my practice, I work a lot with following people, actually. And it might sound a bit weird and a strange thing to promote to students, but it is part of my vocabulary. I find that following someone can really give, and of course, like in a safe way, without giving them a feeling that they're being followed. And I must say that I've learned to do following quite well, especially in London. It's much easier in bigger cities. But this feeling of just going out and choosing someone and following them for some time, abandoning them at a certain point, was a way to let go your own decision making and your own knowledge of the city into someone else's feet. Almost like an animal, like sniffing someone's spots, like really seeing the city through their steps, not necessarily knowing how it's connected in their mind, but really allowing yourself to not think and give all these decisions to someone else. And I must say that those walks led to most strange routes and most interesting encounters and overlaps. And this resulted in a piece that we did together, again with Debbie as part of the demolition project, which was called Shadow, which in English also means actually to follow someone, to shadow someone. And yeah, so in the piece, you, for example, you were booking a ticket to experience this following, and you were given a photograph of a woman to follow, who, for example, would be Debbie, let's say. We did swap. And on the day, the participant comes to the place and there is exchange of SMS saying like, do you see this woman? Now you can start following her when she walks. And we carefully choreographed a route of different types of spaces, more narrow streets, wider streets. We even went into the shopping center, past the cemetery. So there was a real choreography of the path for it to involve different types of spaces. And the person is just following her. That's their mission. And some people took it quite playfully and were playing as if they were following. Some were just following. And at some point when you already think that that's all that is happening, and you're just having this experience of being allowed to follow someone, all the time I'm actually following that person who is following Debbie without them being aware. And I must say that for us, it was about this power of incognito in the city, and this feeling that when you're following someone, you completely forget about possibility that someone can follow you, and that the city allows that that situation. And I must say, from all of our participants, not a single one noticed or guessed that they were followed. And so during that following, I would take photos of them, sometimes very close up, sometimes a bit further. And at some point when Debbie goes inside, like of a cafe, I would approach the person because she like disappears into the toilet or something, and I would approach the person and say, "Hello, my name is Alisa. All this time I've been actually following you. Would you like to sit down and I'll give you a report of how well you followed today?" And I give a very dry report of their following and show them their photos. And I must say that it quite often provoked this strange feeling of both desire to see those photos and the curiosity, and of course the uncanny, this feeling of like of you being followed all the time that you were following. So yeah, for me, this way following became not only my own technique of how I experience the city and how I can get to know it through someone else's feet, but also a way to structure those experiences and to make people aware of big cities and following and following someone and being followed at the same time and so on. And I think it's also connected quite a lot with my homelessness in a way, with like constant change of home and never finding a home in London, because that following was also a way to feel someone else's purposes without sharing that purpose. Someone might be just walking home, actually, walking to see a friend or walking routines of other people, while I didn't really have my own in this city. Score 4. Imagine walking the streets of your own city blindfolded. I'm really interested in offerings, in offering different way, and also in the everyday. So bringing those together, I'm really interested in offering different lens, a different way to see and experience the everyday, the banal, the very common. So when I was in Minsk for a festival that my friends organized, and it was my first time in Minsk actually, I thought, how can I, without knowing the city, how can I show this city to their own inhabitants in a way they have never seen it? And so I offered these blindfolded walks, which were one-to-one performances, and you will see that one-to-one is the genre I use most often. So these were these one-to-one performances where I would blindfold someone, and when we were meeting, they were actually not, they didn't see me, so they trusted me to come behind and put the blindfold on them. We corresponded before that. And in the end, when I took the blindfold off, they also didn't see me. So I just disappeared in the street. So they have never seen me. And while they have never seen me, I led them on around 4 or 5 hours walk around their own city. Me walking there for the first time, actually. And we had only one rule, that we're not gonna talk. So it was a blindfold tour, blindfold walk with no words. So our communication was just through this trust, and then through them experiencing their city without seeing it. And yeah, it was important for me that it was quite long. It was around 4 hours, so it allowed it to actually really immerse into it. And also we even went into a cafe and I fed them a cake and got them a drink. And in the end, we never saw each other. We just had an exchange afterwards where I invited them, if they want to draw a map of where they think we went or how they experienced the journey. And this piece for me is very important in this marriage of the common and the uncommon, and giving a certain framework or an opportunity and experience to someone else, which is only facilitated by me. I'm just the guide in this. I'm not like giving any information or any perspective or any specific route, but through this guidance-ship, allowing someone else to have like a framework for that experience. Score 5. Walk the streets pretending you are a tour guide. Will anyone follow? I'm really inspired by big cities. I'm from Moscow myself, and I love London. Sometimes I get really exhausted of trying to live here, and then it's good to go away, but I always like to come back. I like cities with a lot of different people, a lot of crossing paths, a lot of anonymity which big cities give, and the sense of crowd in a quite classical Edgar Poe-ish way. But I also constantly work in all sort of spaces. I would call my practice site responsive, although it's becoming a bit less of a fashionable word in performance art, but I do indeed always get driven by the place and those who are there, those who walk it, those who inhabit it. And although I do have this strong preference for a big city, sometimes I end up with residencies or in projects in villages or in small places. And I still need to find ways to engage with it. So when I was in residency in Salzburg, a small and very, very posh town in Austria, I was trying to find a way to make something there because I was feeling very uninspired and not really connected to it. And if you've ever been to Salzburg, it consists of endless tourist groups, which have obviously the tour guide at the front, and the tour guide in a very classical way. So it would always be someone with an umbrella or like some sort of object on a stick that defined them as the tour guide. And so they were just like almost this colonies of tour guides and different tourist groups, wandering through the streets of Salzburg, talking about Mozart and mainly Mozart. But and I suddenly realized that this was such a key part of this urban choreography, this sort of herds of tourists led by this tour guides, that I decided that for a day I will become a tour guide with no group. So I had an umbrella and I just went out into the streets, and I was holding my umbrella, you know, the one that's folded in a quite classical tour guide way. And I asked a friend who documented it, and quite like invisible, so she wouldn't be visible, sometimes just taking small videos and photos. And I walked for about 6 or 7 hours during the daytime, just walking in the streets with this umbrella. And it immediately started working behind me. Probably got lost or something, and then they were confused because I was not stopping and I didn't say anything. So at some point that group left. At some point I was standing in front on the big crossing of the street, and suddenly all this huge crowd waiting for the green light became also sort of a group behind me. At some point I was walking some less popular streets, and then I would become just this lost tour guide who has no one to follow them. And this piece became really important to me in a way that it was highlighting this thing I refer to as urban choreographies. So by noticing what is the main sort of pattern of moving in that space, or the main flogs and inhabitants of those streets, I could like disrupt them or enter something that became absurd or like highlighted the what was happening in the streets. And interestingly, several years later, I got this offer to become a tour guide in London for Russian speakers. But what made me intrigued about it was that the the woman who was inviting me, she already had her own tour company, but she moved out of London. But she kept receiving some offers, and so she decided to make this whole business where she makes 3 or 4 other girls who she calls the same name as hers, Yulia, because she's the well-known tour guide, and she just leases the stores to us, and we need to pay 20 pounds fee for her to give us tours, because obviously she's so popular and famous and had never get so many offers for tours, but with her I get it, and then I just pay 20 pounds. Really, I could earn some quite good money. Actually, I still think it was one of, and it is, I'm still doing it, but as you can imagine, there are only very few tours at the moment. And I became one of those Yulias, and I was really feeling that by inhabiting this persona and becoming this and mixing her biography with my own also allowed me more agency to sometimes invent stories on my way. Of course, I knew all the bits of history and I learned the material, but sometimes all these characters would merge and new stories would take place, and this feeling of being a persona myself was allowing to play more and to invent more of those stories. And I must to my tourists, and probably not most of my clients don't know not only that I'm Alisa and have a totally different biography, but also that some of the stories I told were different each time or partially invented. So this was one of this way where my work and my money jobs met. Taking out next. Score 6. What shortcuts do you take? What desired paths have you created? So talking about going to other places to respond to a place, and I must say I've been to quite a lot of residences because I'm quite often invited precisely because of this ability to just create from what is there and just allow the place to reveal or create like a framework for the place to reveal itself or to show itself back to its own inhabitants. I was invited to residency in Narisk. And Narisk is the most northern inhabited city in Russia. And it's really, really far. So it's on the 69th parallel. And it gets to -50 in winter. And this is exactly when the residency was taking place, because it didn't want us to work not with when it's the city, is nice and normal, but to actually work with this harsh conditions that people living there, and mostly they live there because of the industry of nickel production. So we could actually respond to the harsh living conditions of these people there. And this is how the piece about called shortcuts emerged, because the space is so unbearable to just stay in winter that the whole walking evolved into creating different patterns and techniques of how not to stay outside at all. So they have like heated bus stops, their houses most often, for example, if they have shops downstairs of the houses, they would have a walk-through path. So you can walk into the shop and go through all the shops and exit it outside. Also, all of their doors to houses like below, so a different type of housing. So it's more like social housing here. So like the doors to those houses would always be open, so you can also go inside and like be there for a bit. but also people just develop the most short ways to get from anywhere to anywhere else. So I asked people if I could join them to walk together during their usual routes, like going from home to work, or going from school to home, or after work to a chess club, as one of my participants did, and so on and so on. And I followed them on this routes and asked some questions about the way they navigate, the shortcuts they create, but also in more broader sense, how this cutting through, or like this throughness, this feeling of a place that just you go through, also goes wider to NetEase, because it's very rarely a place where people live all their life, and most often is the place where people will just come to work and get more money because they get this very high fees because of working there. And also, for example, sometimes they could be just, and one of my participants always brought up in this way of thinking that when you grow up, you will go. And so she grew up and she went, and then she realized she was trapped in this feeling of always waiting to go, and then she could never stop moving. And another said, like, we're all a bit like passengers in a railway station here, just waiting to go at some point. And this woman, for example, did go eventually, but then became so depressed because she felt like, okay, now I'm arrived here, something that's finished, that she really wanted to actually go back. And they did return to NetEase for this feeling of constant possibility of movement. So this work resulted in an audio walk where you could listen to these short stories, and I made them 69 seconds, so they correspond to this like latitude of this town, and you can follow in your mind those shortcuts and those stories and those life stories of these people. So this was the piece, and I must say that -50 is incredible and takes a lot of layers to go outside. Get the next score. Score 7, go to all places in your city which hold special memories. This was an important piece, and I must say a lot of my work comes from friendship, and it's actually something I'm exploring at the moment, like the idea of walking and friends and friendship. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but that is something I realize I'm really interested in. And so this was also an invitation of friends at Chisholm Hill to take part in this 24 hours festival that would be on the day that Britain was leaving Europe. So it would be like to spend those 24 hours together, and they framed it between two breakfasts, one continental breakfast and one full English breakfast as this metaphor. And I immediately knew what I wanted to do. I said, like, I would like to do a 24-hour walk and go to all these places which hold certain special memories that I marked in London, almost as a dog marks different surfaces or walls, and see what that city is actually for me. What has it become? What does it mean for me to live in London? What are all those places which hold memories, which matter, which were moments of encounter? And I decided that I will go in no particular order, however they come. So I started at 8 a.m. and then walked for 24 hours, coming back at 8 a.m. the next day. I did, of course, like stop and get a bit of food, but I would intend and continue walking all the time. So I didn't stop for too long. And I also had a phone inside the gallery, inside the Chisholm Hill dance space. And I was sending my notes and photos as I walked back to the phone there. And people could message me and interact and ask questions. So we had quite a few really interesting and important conversations about home and and Brexit and things that were changing and coming and going, and the idea of belonging and displacement. And because I was walking in no particular order, just how things were coming to me, sometimes going all the way from north to the south and heading back sort of halfway north. And of course, it reminded a bit like a dream, because it suddenly connected all these places that were not connected. But like in a dream, you know, you can quickly jump from one place to another. Here it had a pace of footsteps, so I couldn't get from one place I thought to the next one quicker than I could walk there. So it was this strange dream of connecting all these places that were not connected, also connecting to the people who were talking to me, and we were reflecting on these places and what places make the city for them together. So this sort of pilgrimage became a way to really think what that city is for me, and what are these moments of belonging or connection, and what stays and what goes. So just to taking out the next score, and just to orient you, I have 3 more left. Score 8. Describe the city you have never been to. This piece was actually created before COVID, but I feel that it has a lot of those moments that later became really important and key during COVID, and the way my practice adapted to the pandemic. It was a small commission from PhD students in Manchester who were exploring Russian art, and they just invited me to Manchester and said, like, just do anything you want. And I somehow immediately had this thought, because my life is constantly in between places. It's between Russia, where I was born, and London, where I'm living now half of my life. It's between Russia, where I'm from again, and Ukraine, where my partner is from. And these 2 countries, which through most of our life have been at war and in conflict, and affects when and how we can go or not go to each other countries. It's also with my parents' displacement in 90s and them living now in different cities. For example, my father is in Austria. So this constant feeling of like there's other places, and this need to establish a connection or to maintain thinking about that place has always meant that I was really working between cities, working with distance and working with connectivity, which all became suddenly so important during the lockdown. But in this piece, I immediately thought like, oh wow, Manchester, like how can I make something there? I just came here. I don't know it. But then I thought that not knowing is actually the beautiful bit. And because a lot of my friends in Russia can never get a visa to UK, or even Europe is quite hard, but UK is much harder. So quite often I invite them, but they cannot come. And so I suddenly thought like, what if I ask all of them who've never been to Manchester to describe Manchester, to describe what they think about it, how they imagine it, how they see it, how they walk it. And I asked them to record those descriptions, and out of them I made this fictive tour guide. I guided people in Manchester around their own city, and I found places that sort of resonated with the descriptions my friend made in Russia, and then overlaid those places, connected them in this route, in this tour sort of, and then led people on this walk. And when approaching each of the locations, we would gather around the speaker and listen to this someone's description of their own town, someone who has never been there. And it became a really beautiful way again to get to know your own place, but also to invite all of this my Russian friends to imagine that place and to probably reimagine or define what Manchester is. And in that meeting, there was some really beautiful moments, and I got feedback from some of the people from Manchester that it was for them a way to see their own town completely differently. And yeah, and now when I look back, I think that that piece, that impossibility of being somewhere, and that feeling of connecting places is not only a big part of the classical psychogeography, because one of the psychogeography exercises was, for example, to use a map of Paris, but walk in London as if you're in Paris, and so on and so forth. But it also was like almost prophetic before this year where we couldn't go, and where we could just connect at a distance. Like in a way we're connecting at a distance now through this walk. And I don't know how many of you are walking simultaneously with me, or how many of you are by the screen, but this feeling of breathing together, of walking together at the same time somewhere in different places became suddenly central for me for the next 2 years when we went into the lockdown. Score 9. Go out. Think of where is home for you in your city. Walk there. So the piece called Walking Home became really central and this like transitory for me when the pandemic started. It was one of those projects that probably a lot of you had, which was still imagined as a live one. And I already had tickets booked to Istanbul to work with performance space there, Perform Istanbul. But then the trip was cancelled. Everything went into full lockdown. And the piece was totally imagined as a physically present one. So a one-to-one work where I was inviting women in Istanbul to walk with me one-to-one and to take me to wherever they feel, think home is for them in their own city, whether it is their actual home, or it is another place, or it's a previous home, or it's a person, or it's the sea. Oh wow, it's dramatic. Yeah, and so as the pandemic happened, I was thinking that it felt really important to still do that piece. And it was becoming even more important because issues of like, what is home is stay home, stay safe, actually true for everyone. Does everyone have a home? Is for someone home a much less safe place than the city streets? And so on, and especially with Istanbul and the Istanbul Convention and like really quite backwards changes that were happening there for women. It felt like important not to give it up, although I was personally, of course, so disappointed of not going to the city I always dreamt to go. But yeah, I decided to find a way to make that work happen. And what it became, and I must say that the decision came quite quickly. But it became this quite obvious for me at that point, distant walk piece. So I decided that I'm still gonna connect with this woman. We're gonna connect through the phone, and we're gonna set out and walk at the same time. And they will indeed lead me to this place they call home. And I will indeed walk, but I'll be walking in London, following their footstep and their breathing as you are following now, and having a conversation about home. And And we even managed to do it with those who couldn't speak English, and I could send them in WhatsApp the messages, and they would talk in Turkish, and I wouldn't understand it at that moment. But that feeling of like walking together and really sharing those footsteps became so important. And I was getting this feedback saying for them, like, I feel like it's so important that you are actually walking together with me. I feel that I am taking you somewhere and we're sharing that walk. And I must say that overwhelming amount of women applied. I was even really stretched thinking how I can host each of these walks, but I felt really important not to do any, selection or limit of numbers. And I did indeed commit to walk with everyone. And so in the end, all these walks happened one-to-one, me walking in London, then walking in Istanbul, taking me home and holding those really important conversations, some snippets of which later became part of an audio walk, and also a small video that documented this connection by someone filming my feet walking in London and their feet walking in Istanbul, and then in the video putting them next to each other. So it was a way to finally connect, even if on the screen, so to put our feet next to each other and to allow us to meet. To all connected. And I think my headphones disconnected. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yeah, I can hear you
I'm
still.
back. Yeah. Yeah, so, and being committed to hold that work despite the circumstances, even if it meant changing the work, felt really important, and as a way to keep going. Yeah, so you can access it and see the documentation of it online. And I'm moving to the last score. Score 10. Ask a friend to describe their favorite place in their city. Find a resonating place to that in your own city. This score is a bit different, but still reflects this final piece I want to mention, which is called Port to Port, and is the last work I just recently finished, which was a commission by Peer Projects based in Felixstowe, and was an invitation to work with the city of Felixstowe, with one of the largest container ports in the UK. And I immediately thought, it was already like sort of second year of the pandemic, but I immediately thought about, and also, about the whole environment of Felixstowe is quite a happy British seaside town, but with that huge port, which is just hovering and spreading its sounds through the city. Through the town, but as one of the inhabitants told me, in a way you can just always turn away from the port as if it doesn't exist. So I wanted to bring that port back into the existence and in a way allow it to almost like look back and reflect back. And this is how this idea of actually bridging and finding dialogue between different port cities came to my mind. And so the commission was based on different Felixstowe inhabitants' contribution of places of importance in Felixstowe. So that was my starting point. I already had those. And feeling how I can hold them and how I can almost like, return them back to its own place. I decided that I will make this resonances, the signals, this like sending and receiving between different port towns in the world and Felixstowe. So I found 25 people around the world in other port town cities who agreed to take part, and I would send them each one of the locations that were contributed in Felixstowe and ask them to respond with a place in their own hometown. So in the way this work became the set of dialogues, the set of connections and resonances and signals, sending, receiving. And it was for me really connected with the idea of port and this idea of coming and going and the ships, arriving and departing. And it was the pirate radio there, Caroline, and the signals, it was sending. So it all came together as this broadcast, which you can now access and listen. So you can book a broadcast. So the sound will be actually streamed to you directly, live. And the stream is produced together with a Ukrainian sound artist and is holding and embracing all of those contributions of those places and overlaying them and mixing and allowing them to meet, although not in the physical space, but like those places actually meet through this dialogue and through this resonance. And I think for me, this connects talking about like my works, because I always combine art practice with multiple jobs, which I'm sure is not a surprise for a lot of you and is a common practice. But I feel like that piece really led into the invitation to do programming in Pushkin House, because in a way that's, for me, as how I see it, is also about creating those signals, sending and receiving those dialogues, with this invitation, with this a bit of matchmaking, almost like of inviting people to the place, inviting people who don't know each other into dialogue between themselves, and so on and so on. So it feels like quite a natural transition and a step. And I think that's where I would like to leave it and open it for the discussion. I don't know who of you are still walking, but I don't know. I didn't mention it in the beginning, but if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can also ask them and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Alisa. It's Owen.
Yeah.
I'm still on the street. I'm not going to put my camera on because I'm saving every little bit of battery juice that I have left, which is very little.
You made it.
But yes, this has been absolutely fantastic. I have so many questions. I'm not going to ask you them all because I'd like to open it up to the students as well, who I'm sure have some questions. And I'm also really just intrigued to hear about people's journeys, but a few things came up, and I'll try to kind of direct them, I guess, towards the kind of DPS program as well in some ways. But I'm still really fascinated by your work as a tour guide. It was so interesting to hear the narrative around how you found that job. But what I'm really interested in is how this person has asked you to I guess perform under their name, which is already some kind of like performative act, but how in some ways you've used this person who set up a business and you're working for them, you've used that as a moment to make your own work happen, or at least undertake research for that. And it makes me think of you also talked about your interest in the ordinary and the kind of everyday, and it makes me think of this book by Michel de Soto, the practice of everyday life, and in one of these things he talks about people, mostly women actually, writing love letters during work time. So during their work time, kind of burrowing out a kind of space of autonomy for themselves to write these love letters to other people. And for me, you're kind of occupying of this role of the, you know, paid work, doing paid work and finding some kind of autonomy in that, because this is kind of related to your practice. So yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, especially in relation to, you know, what it means to be a walking artist as a woman, because I think of the I guess historical image of the flaneur, right, from a kind of French flaneur who would walk without intention, as this very kind of, I guess, male figure. And so yeah, a few things I'm throwing around there. I also was thinking about my own performance as I was walking, about how walking and listening allowed me to kind of disappear, and how some moments of authenticity between myself and the city came about. But also how sometimes I became self-conscious of myself walking and became more kind of performative. So yeah, very interesting. Any thoughts in relation to that would be, yeah, really great to hear about.
Yeah, sure. And there are a lot of things here I can resonate with, but yeah, in terms of the like everyday and fitting it in, I'm quite lucky to be one of those people who've always been doing. I think that's why I started also with this like reflection of why I'm walking, because I've been lucky to be doing something, then discovering it can be my language in art. Like I only discovered, you know, that walking can be a practice when I was at Goldsmiths, and was given this like umbrella term or like some sort of permission for this to be a practice. And that's also when I discovered the whole situation is, and you know, almost like this feeling of finding, oh, actually what I've always been doing is called something and can be a thing. And then, you know, really keeping faithful to that, and then becoming recognized for just keeping doing it. And as I say, in the recent years, it became quite popular suddenly, and walking commissions became more normal. So I feel quite lucky, but also like, you know, I'm proud that this happened, that there's like trust in the doing, just allow things to, you know, emerge. But it also led to, I guess, the style. It was really interesting. I was recently like asked to do something and was given a very big budget, and actually they know in the end decided not to take me because I couldn't see how I could use the budget. And most of my work is always very low key and doesn't need anything almost, except sometimes, you know, a pair of headphones and nothing much more. So yeah, which made me also think, you know, that it's part of both the choice but also the circumstances, because I've always had to find ways to do work. You know, it was never a practice on its own. There were always these other things of having to find a place to stay, of having to find all these endless jobs. And I've counted, I had more than 100 different jobs since I'm 16 and since I moved to London. And you know, at some point I worked in the Porsche gallery in like Hauser and Wirth as a invigilator, and then I would you know, sit on this bench and draw the patterns of people moving all day on one piece of paper, and that like led to this quite beautiful drawings. Or like there would always be a need to find a way to keep doing your work while you're also doing all sorts of crazy jobs. There was another situation when I was like on this really strange job opportunity in the middle of nowhere in France, in an artist like space, and like an artist residency. And I was finding the only time to walk was at night because I was working all the rest of the time, and that led me into interest in night walking, and I developed several pieces about that. So yeah, it's always been like almost hard to say what defines what, you know, like a chicken and egg question. Like, is it because I always had to do these things, my practice is like that, or is my practice like that because that's what I you know, choose? Or probably it's a both. But yeah, it was just always this feeling that you will I will keep doing or going no matter what is the framework. So this is probably like answering the first part, and then and then the second about like women walking, and I'm really aware of this, but also at the same time, like this learning about the plein air at first was quite exciting, but then I quite quickly became disillusioned with it, and more excited about the idea of finding like other ways to inhabit the city. And quite often it was actually about walking together or walking like collectively. But also I must say that I'm quite, I think it also depends a bit on my growing up. I was always brought up in quite rough places or like areas. So I was quite often, and also because I came to London and I have nowhere, to stay, and the streets became my place. Like it's almost this feeling of agency and of belonging to the streets that makes you less afraid, I think, because I really feel that I own the streets. Like, and I think, for example, I didn't really mention it today, but my practice of parkour is really important because it also gives like some sort of framework for this ownership of the city, for this feeling of that this is like not the background, but these are real walls, this is real floors, like this is, I can touch them. So there's actually a lot of touch and textures.
Could you just say what parkour is for newcomers to
parkour? Sure. So it's there are different terms for it, like free running, parkour, art de déplacement, but it's basically this practice which was again born in the banlieue, in the suburbs of Paris, by a group of migrant kids. So, which is a practice of moving through the city, not in a way that the urban environment suggests, crossings and paths, but moving through the city in the most efficient and like sort of go through way. So it involves a lot of touching and climbing over and going under and over. So not like following the route that the city suggests you. And the one I do is very soft. So it's about like small actions, but it is definitely about this feeling of ownership and a bit more connection to the streets and to the place, which I think helps to feel more empowered and like more at home in the streets. But also like another thing you mentioned, which I resonate with, is the idea of anonymity and like there's different personas you can take on, or like there's different people you can be, and my quite big attraction to like crowds and sometimes the opposite, but like this feeling that the city is that place where all these paths cross, where encounters are possible, where chance, or there are certain patterns we don't see unless we stay long in one place, and so on and so on. So these are all like my inspirations and points of reference.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, jump in.
Sorry. I should say to anyone, because it's the first time I'm using Zoom on my mobile phone, so I can't find the chat function. So those of you who may be new to using kind of Zoom on your phones as well, I notice if you sort of scroll through to the one on the left, there's a function to tap to speak, and so you may just need to kind of speak up and intervene as I'm doing now if you want to ask a question, if you can't find the chat like me. But anyway, I've had a fascinating time. It's been it's interesting, both walking, through across my local area. I'm sitting outside in between a mother and child hospital and Hammersmith Hospital at the moment, in a little nook I found, freezing, but also feeling like I'm going, Alisa, with you on a journey through time as you're kind of bringing us through your kind of thoughts and the scripts. It's been kind of really interesting. I wanted to pick up on what the points that Owen was just making, because I was really also fascinated in that moment of realization you had when you noticed that that the tour, that you could somehow, you recognise that there was a moment that you could sort of make use of that for your own work. And there will be, many of our students will be, if they're making films or whatever, or painters, they'll often be, they'll understand a kind of model that, they make these objects and they end up in a gallery, and people, if they're interested, come along and buy them. And that's an obvious traditional model. But there are so many of our students that have what I would call kind of hybrid art practices, in various ways, including performative. And what's really interesting, I know it's one of the strands that of your work, of noticing that kind of entrepreneurial form from hospitality and tourism, but understanding there's ways you can adapt that to your own practice and noticing that. And I'm struck in really everything you said, it was about that kind of adaptability. And I've noticed certainly through the pandemic that adaptability is now a really prized mindset for galleries, organizations, artists of all sorts, because we're handling so much change. So I'm wondering, with in mind those students who, they may have a performative practice, or it may be mixed with different strands to it, and they may be thinking, I have no idea how the hell I'd make this work when I leave CSM. Do you have any advice for them about using those skills of adaptability and noticing, other ways that they can adapt conventional, approaches like tourism or entrepreneurial things, but they can adapt it to help themselves when they leave? Just any advice that you might offer?
Yeah, sure. Some part of it is quite intuitive, so that bit is hard to explain. Like, I just find ways. But as a strategy, probably like what I find really important and fascinating is that when you have this sort of like art form that sits in so many things and in between, and I think most of us are doing work like this these days, I find that the power of different communities is really strong. So it's also like this way of connecting to other people and using different other like environments. So for example, I belong to both, sound art scene and the movement scene through parkour, and like sound art through audio walks, and visual art through my background. And I use quite a lot of photography. So it's like all this like different pools of people. And I guess this skill of what I called like matchmaking, but this skill of like bringing different people together. And I don't know if it really surfaced today, but a lot of my work is really collaborative, both with working who is there in the place where I come, but also, working with a sound artist, with other artists, and so on. So yeah, I feel like there's something as a strategy, I think, is really important, like this feeling of the community and others, and reaching out and asking, and like creating connections and so on and so on. And in terms of like finding this jobs which can then become something else or something, I think it happens like again, it's like in between. Sometimes it happens, probably because it's something I'm already looking at. I feel like that tour guide job is, almost like was coming out of that piece, and it actually happened not long after, or there's like some of the other offers of jobs. So like I recently became a trustee at the Cheese and Hair, but because it is a place that gave me so much, so it's like this feeling of building connections and maintaining them and making them crisscross. And I'm a big fan of mixing the scenes, because sometimes I feel like part of these communities I belong to never actually get introduced to each other or are not aware of each other. So I really believe in this like feeling of stirring, or like a provocative like meetings and invitations and so on. Yeah, I don't know if it's exactly answered the question, but that's something that came up to my mind when you asked.
No, it does. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, this
Anyone
is fantastic. Yeah, I was going to say, have we got any questions from the students as well?
I can see the chat is empty, but it might be because not everyone found where it is.
Any questions? Or where do you want to just say a little bit about your journey, just to hear where you are, or if anything came up? I'd love to hear from people. I think the sense of walking together, and that feels really important in your work, Alisa.
Yeah,
I dipped in and out of, feeling like I'm on my own journey, and then realizing, oh, actually, there's other people, and there was something quite nice about that as well. The sense of being kind of connected in that way. But yeah,
And having people very close in your ear talking to you and hearing their breathing, it's very intimate, isn't it? It's lovely. It's really nice. And
it's
but
really
also
nice.
talking about faraway places and, you know, at the same time.
Yeah.
So interesting series of contradictions that you inhabit as you walk with the lesser. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I became a big believer in simultaneous walks during this half a year, because it became like, I don't know, a very simple tool that actually opened up a lot of, and I did use it in very different ways. So sometimes it was like today through the audio and just the connection. Sometimes it was through a photo score. So we would be in the same WhatsApp group and we would have a certain score, and then we go on the walk and we feedback the photos. So one of them was like invitation to go out. It was called Touching with Your Eyes, and it was invitation to go outside. And it was, you know, the beginning of pandemic when we were suddenly very aware of surfaces and touch. So it was an invitation to not touch things, but if you see something on your walk that you really want to touch, to take photos of it. And in the end, like, everyone was sending those photos as we walked in totally different cities, and it became like so sensual, because like all of this pouring of these different surfaces and objects and structures, architecture bits, was suddenly like a way for us to connect, and sometimes they were responding to each other, or, you know, you've seen something and then you are like finding something similar to it. And yeah, so there can be different ways to use it, not only through like a conversation, for example.
Oh, this is fantastic. Can we hear from someone? It'd be lovely to hear a little bit about your journey, even if you don't have a question for Alisa. Hey, who's that?
This is Lucy. I can hear me properly.
Oh, great. Yeah, Lucy.
Hey. Thanks so much, Lisa. It was really, really interesting, because I'm outside of London. I live in the countryside, and I have a dog, so I always take her for walks all the time, and it's like a big part of my daily life. But I never go when it's dark, because I just prefer the sunshine. But it was actually really interesting when it was getting dark and I saw things completely differently. And it didn't, I think I don't go when it's dark because it feels kind of creepy in the middle of nowhere where it's completely silent and there's like one street light. But it didn't, because I was on this call with you guys, so it felt completely different that way, and it felt totally fine. And then also the thing you were talking about with like all being online together at the same moment, but also exchanging messages and things. That's when I go for walks normally, I'm always recording voice notes and sending them to my friends, or listening to voice notes that people have sent to me, and then like our own personal podcasts kind of thing. And I never thought of it as this way, but it's actually basically everything you've been talking about has been making me like rethink things and see them differently. So thank you so much for that.
Well, thanks for sharing, and I'm glad you went out on this dark walk together with us.
I envy your dog, Lucy. Must be lovely to do this with the dog.
Yeah, I was wondering about that actually, because it's not really walking like aimlessly, because there's the whole thing of walking with Maxi is there's a purpose all the time.
Yeah, it's true. There is a whole actually strand of artists in walking art working with dogs. I'm just not one of them, but it's quite a big theme. There is like a whole dog walkers walking art strand. But yeah, it's super interesting what you say about like the voice messages, because for example, we also did this collective work where during lockdown again, I invited everyone. We joined like the same group, and whenever, this was not simultaneous, but like whenever you go on a walk, I invited to record a small voice message of a bit of your route, you know, like just saying, I'm turning right, I'm walking down the street, I'm turning left, I'm standing under the tree, and so on. And everyone recorded a bit over a certain time, and then I collaged all of those notes, so I made them into one long audio walk. And it was this like, you know, abstract dreamy invitation to go out and follow this route, which of course was quite impossible, but also was a way, you know, to meet all of those roots and like to connect all of those personal moments into some collective thing. So yeah, this idea of, you know, like some mundane small message or note that can then become part of something else, or is already part of something else, you know, like you said, without you probably knowing it or something. Yeah, but I'm a big fan of like simple everyday formats. So that's why I end up using social media quite a lot. Not even social media, but like messengers or groups, chats, phone calls, because these things are already there. We use them already. So I guess it fits with my idea of like my interest in the everyday. So I very rarely, you know, like use any special app, or at some point I collaborated with someone who's a cool phone hacker who gave me like a free UK phone number and gave me access to how to control its voice messages. So you could call this number, and then, you know, by choosing 1, 2, 3, or 4, there were different like instructions and scores you could walk on. And I really like that it was just, you know, a simple number you call, not like a link you follow or something. So yeah, I'm definitely like up for this everyday modes of communication as a tool.
It does make it a kind of encounter as well. I was wondering also, you've mentioned that you've done quite a number of residencies across the world, and I can imagine there'll be some of the students listening who'd be thinking, I'd love to do one of those, one that may be particularly favourable to this kind of practice or to walking. So it may be that you did very, you know, ones which were not walking centred, but do you have any recommendations about any particular kinds of residencies that are, you know, really encourage this kind of walking performative practices?
Not really, actually, but I think it was just a general, you know, like open calls or different residencies, and then I would just choose to make this sort of project. But more like what you could look out for is more things that are calling for, you know, site specific or site responsive, or working with the place, because that's where, you know, walking can really come in. And I also must say, at the moment there is this big strand of walking and well-being, and that's not, for example, exactly what I'm interested in, or not the language I'm interested in, but sometimes you can also, you know, like fit something into something, but then come and do something a bit more. And I mean, it would still be about well-being, because it's good to go out for a walk, but you can stretch it. So sometimes I do a bit of this like cheating and using certain language, but then like actually making something else. And also I must say that it's, again, I can't stress enough the importance of like friends and community and others, because at least half of these residencies were friends doing something, or like trying out a new space, or, you know, new cities in Russia which were doing something and would invite me to come, because I hold these other knowledges which are not available in Russia. So yeah, there was also a lot of personal invitations which wouldn't come unless I reached out or like felt like part of that group or community. So I think you can do both. You can, of course, like monitor the open calls, and I must say there are quite a few around now, but you can also like nurture these communities and connections and friends, and then things sometimes emerge out of them.
Is there
Fantastic.
anyone else who'd like to share a little detail about their journey, or where they've been, or where they are right now, even if you're at your kitchen table?
Yeah, I think there are not that many of us left. It's on there.
I'm going to take that as a pregnant pause. I'll take that as a pregnant pause, actually. And well, in that case, Owen, unless you have more questions you want to ask, I'm not sure. But oh, something's in the chat.
Yeah, Lucy is saying, let me just open that.
Do you ever find yourself on the same streets over and over, and then go down ones you've never been before in London?
Yeah, it's an interesting mix, because I'm obsessed with everyday and routines and routes, and I actually work so much with this like people's everyday routes, things that are already there, you know, they're not special. And sometimes when I come, people want to take me on some like spectacular walks or something, but I actually ask for the most mundane and everyday. So I really like repetition and patterns, and certain like routes I repeat. And at the same time, sometimes I really like this feeling of wandering. So I combine those both things, but they're quite like separate for me. So I really value those, you know, repeated routes and routines I have, and I build in, because I'm constantly moving in London. As I said, I'm quite like a nomadic person in London, both by choice but also circumstances. But these routines and routes re-emerge each time I move, and then I sort of leave them behind or like abandon. But yeah, at the same time, I have this other mode of experiencing the city, which is just this drifting, walking aimlessly. And I must say, it's really hard. Like, I work quite a lot with students, and sometimes like you just end up going to, you know, a shop or like to the place you were wanting to go anyway, or something. Like, it's not that easy to just let it go and like really drift and find somewhere. That's why, for example, probably like this following as a technique comes in, or certain scores, you know, where it asks, you know, to draw a it's a classical, it's like geography score, where it invites you to put a glass on a map and circle the, you know, the below of the glass with pencil, and then just try and walk as close to that line as possible, which is an impossible task because, of course, the city would not allow you to walk exactly that line. There will be buildings in the way, but still, it provokes or gives a framework for this wandering. So yeah, I would say it's both of these things are super important to me.
Brilliant. Great. Well, yeah, unless there's any other questions, I think we can wrap up.
Yes, I think we can. So any of us, well, certainly me and Owen and anyone left, if we can just thank, if you've got access to the chat line, then just put in emojis or thank her or say thank you. But anyway, I found it, it's been a fantastic event. Thank you so much. It's been really great.
Yeah.
And I've been both being in a kind of local area that I'm used to, but being far away with you, thinking about other places and Russia, which I've not been to for so long, and others, has been the form of that. I think our students experiencing this talk not just as another academic talk, but as an encounter, you know, and as and that the creativity is not just in the content or the subject matter, but is in all of that organizational stuff, the form, everything that you take. All of it is the creativity, you know, and the innovation of what you do, you know, and to bring all of that to it. So, Alisa, you've been very generous, and it will be memorable, I think, for lots of us. We'll look back at this in a couple of years' time as this shared walk in the depth of cold night in July.
Yeah.
That is right.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely fantastic.
So thank you very much.
Thank you those who joined, and hopefully like some who can access it later could take it on a walk as well and use it almost like as an audio guide or something.
Yes,
I'll be sharing. For the invite.
I'll be sharing a recording, the video recording